The first time he saw it, the farm looked like something out of a nightmare. Rusted fences sagged under years of neglect, the barn roof was caving in, and the fields were overgrown with weeds that clawed at his boots as he stepped into the pasture. For most people, this would have been the end of the dream, but not for Daniel. He had always been drawn to the impossible, the kind of challenges that left others shaking their heads and walking away. And yet, the moment his eyes fell on the edge of that tangled field, something caught him completely off guard. A flash of movement, a dark, powerful shape darting between the shadows of the trees, made him freeze. There was no mistaking it, a horse. But not just any horse. This one had a raw, untamed energy, a wildfire that seemed to radiate danger and defiance. Its coat was a patchwork of dirt and scars, its mane tangled like a storm cloud caught in a gale. And yet, there was a magnetism in its eyes, an intelligence, a wariness that made Daniel's chest tighten. He had expected decay, neglect, and maybe a few stray animals, but this horse, it was a presence. Almost as if it had been waiting for him. Daniel knew little about horses at first, but he felt an instant, inexplicable connection. He could see the story etched into the animal's body, the long months of survival, the nights spent alone under the stars, the countless threats from both man and nature. And for reasons he didn't yet understand, he felt compelled to step closer. But the horse did not step closer. Instead, it bolted, a shadow tearing through the pasture, hooves drumming against the dry earth. Daniel's heart raced, part fear, part exhilaration. Most people would have turned around at that moment, chalked it up to bad luck, and left. Not him. He was certain this horse held the key to something bigger, a journey that would change both their lives. Over the next few days, Daniel explored every corner of the farm. The house was dilapidated, every wall bearing the stains of time and neglect, yet there was a strange beauty in the decay. The barn, though dangerous to enter, hinted at its former life, once a home to thriving horses, now silent and echoing with memories. He imagined what it must have been like decades ago. Laughter, hooves pounding, the smell of hay and leather, the sound of riders calling to their steeds. He began to picture the life that could exist here again, and more importantly, the horse that could guide him there. The horse, which he soon nicknamed Shadow, was elusive. Days would go by without a glimpse, and then suddenly, it would appear at dusk, watching him from the tree line, ears pricked, muscles coiled with tension. Daniel tried every approach, food, patience, soft calls, but Shadow had learned to survive without trust, and humans were often dangerous. It was a dance of wills, and for every step Daniel took forward, Shadow took one back. Yet, something shifted in Daniel during those moments. He realized this wasn't just about taming a wild animal, it was about understanding it. About respecting its boundaries and proving, silently, that he wasn't a threat. He began to study Shadow like a scholar studies ancient texts, watching the way it shifted weight from hoof to hoof, the way its nostrils flared at unseen scents, the way it observed him with what felt like judgment and curiosity rolled into one. Daniel's backstory added layers to his obsession. He had left a high-stress city life behind, leaving behind a career that drained him and a divorce that broke him in ways he hadn't fully acknowledged. He came to this farm seeking healing, but what he found was more than solitude. Shadow mirrored something in him, the instinct to protect oneself, the fear of vulnerability, the yearning for trust after betrayal. Every time he attempted to approach, every time the horse fled, he felt the sting of rejection, not just from the animal but from life itself. And yet, every glimpse of Shadow's wary eyes sparked hope. One evening, Daniel set up a small campfire near the edge of the pasture. The air was thick with the smell of dry grass and smoke. As he settled onto an old log, he spoke softly, not to train, not to command, but to communicate something more primal, that he meant no harm. Hours passed. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. Shadows lengthened, and for a moment, Daniel felt utterly alone, until he heard it. The soft, deliberate crunch of hooves through the underbrush. Shadow had returned. The horse emerged slowly from the twilight, muscles tense, eyes bright with caution. Daniel held his breath. This was it, the first true moment of contact. Shadow stopped a few yards away, nostrils flaring, tail flicking. Time seemed to stretch, the world narrowing to just the two of them. Daniel whispered words he hadn't even realized he knew. "I see you. I respect you. You're safe here." The horse tilted its head, studying him, weighing the sincerity in his tone. And then, against every instinct Daniel expected, it did something small but monumental. It took a tentative step closer. And then another. He froze, afraid that any sudden movement might undo this fragile bridge. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He sat near the fire, listening to Shadow graze quietly nearby, the tension slowly easing. It was the first time he realized that this farm, and this horse, might not just be a project or a way to escape his past. It might be a way to rebuild himself entirely. By the end of that first week, Daniel began documenting every encounter, every flicker of trust, every refusal, every tiny breakthrough. Each moment carried suspense. Would Shadow bolt at the next attempt? Would Daniel misstep and lose the fragile connection they had begun to form? These questions kept him awake, not out of fear, but out of wonder, because he could feel, deep in his bones, that something extraordinary was about to unfold. And so, the stage was set. A wild horse with scars both visible and hidden, a man with wounds he hadn't faced, and a rundown farm that held the promise of transformation. The question lingered in the air like the smoke from the fire. Could two lost souls, one human, one horse, find redemption together? Could trust be built where fear had long dominated? Little did Daniel know, the coming days would push him to his limits, testing patience, courage, and the very essence of his character. The moments of tension, the unexpected twists, the mini triumphs and setbacks, they were all just the beginning. Shadow had a lesson to teach, one that would reach far beyond the boundaries of the farm. And for anyone watching, this story wasn't just about a horse. It was about the power of connection, the resilience of spirit, and the kind of wonder that only a truly wild creature can inspire. If you're ready to follow this journey, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because what happens next is nothing short of extraordinary. The bond that would form between Daniel and Shadow would defy expectations, challenge every assumption, and ultimately reveal a truth that only the bravest hearts can understand. The mornings on the farm had a different kind of silence. The city's chaos was gone, replaced by the hum of nature, the distant crow of a rooster, the rustle of leaves in the wind, and occasionally the soft snort of Shadow somewhere in the tall grass. Daniel woke before sunrise, pulling on worn boots, carrying a bucket of oats, and stepping into the cool, misty pasture. Every step was deliberate, every movement measured, because one false gesture could shatter the fragile trust he had built over that first week. Shadow was not cooperative. That much was clear. The horse had mastered avoidance, disappearing into hidden hollows, slipping behind broken fence lines, and vanishing into the thick undergrowth as though he had never existed. But Daniel had learned to watch, to wait, to read the subtle signs, the twitch of an ear, the lift of a tail, the barely perceptible flex of muscles beneath a matted coat. These small indicators told him where Shadow was, what he was thinking, and, sometimes, how to get a fraction closer to bridging the gap. On the second day, Daniel tried something new. He left the bucket of oats in the open, a few yards away from the barn, and stepped back, crouching low behind a fallen log. He knew he had to let Shadow make the choice, to approach or to flee. Minutes passed like hours. Then he saw a glint of movement, a hoof emerging from the shadows, followed by a cautious nose. Shadow was testing the waters, sniffing, assessing, calculating risk. Daniel held his breath, feeling the thrill of victory before anything had even truly happened. But just as quickly, Shadow stiffened, ears flattening, and bolted into the woods. Daniel clenched his fists, the familiar pang of disappointment stabbing him, but he refused to let frustration take over. Every refusal, every moment of resistance, was part of the process. Shadow had survived on his own terms for too long to surrender easily. Daniel whispered softly into the wind, "I'll wait. I'll be here when you're ready." Those early weeks were a test of patience. He mended broken fences, cleared debris, and slowly began transforming the farm, not for himself alone, but for Shadow, for the life he imagined for them both. The horse watched it all from a distance, always alert, never letting down his guard. Daniel realized that earning Shadow's trust wasn't about dominating him. It was about proving reliability, predictability, and kindness. He couldn't force a bond. He could only invite it. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled in. Dark clouds swallowed the sky, wind whipping through the trees, lightning slashing across the horizon. Daniel's instinct was to run for shelter, but he froze when he spotted Shadow at the edge of the field, ears pinned, muscles taut, eyes wide with fear. The horse wasn't hiding. He was trapped by the rising waters of a small creek, the fence behind him too broken to offer escape. Daniel didn't hesitate. Adrenaline surged. He ran into the storm, rain plastering his hair to his forehead, mud squelching beneath his boots, and spoke Shadow's name over the roar of thunder. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the horse whirled, muscles coiled to flee, but Daniel kept pace, matching his speed with careful steps, calm but assertive. Shadow skidded on slick mud, slid dangerously close to the water's edge, and Daniel reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. Not forcing, not yanking, but steadying. Shadow trembled, breathing ragged, before slowly, cautiously, allowing Daniel to guide him to higher ground. It was the first true moment of partnership. They stood side by side in the rain, drenched and shivering, two beings connected by more than survival, connected by mutual recognition of trust, courage, and need. Daniel felt a swell of emotion he couldn't name. Relief, awe, pride, and an unshakable sense that this was only the beginning. Over the following days, Shadow's behavior shifted subtly. The horse began lingering longer at the edge of the barn, ears flicking toward Daniel rather than away. Sometimes, he even allowed him to approach within a few feet without bolting. Small victories, but monumental in their significance. Daniel documented each step meticulously, taking notes on timing, mood, and conditions as if studying a living, breathing puzzle. But trust was never linear. Some mornings, Shadow would vanish entirely, leaving Daniel pacing the fields, heart sinking, wondering if they had taken one step forward only to fall 2 steps back. Other times, the horse would appear unexpectedly, just close enough to observe him, nostrils flaring, tail flicking, a silent reminder that he was still sovereign in this territory. These mini-conflicts, the push and pull of approach and retreat, kept the tension alive, every encounter a cliffhanger that Daniel and the audience could feel. Daniel's backstory added layers of depth to these interactions. He thought often of his father, a man who had loved horses but had never taught him anything beyond fear of failure. He thought of the career he had abandoned, the divorce that had left him questioning his ability to form any kind of lasting bond. Shadow, in all his wild unpredictability, mirrored those fears, but also offered redemption. Every step the horse took toward him was a reminder that trust could be rebuilt, that patience could heal even the deepest wounds. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson, T2, the audience is left with questions. Will Shadow ever fully trust Daniel? How will the challenges of the farm, the wildness of the horse, and Daniel's own emotional scars collide? And most importantly, what will it take to transform both the horse and the man? If you're inspired by this journey so far, consider hitting like, sharing the story, and subscribing. The moments ahead promise awe, heartbreak, and the kind of emotional breakthroughs that remind us why we fall in love with horses, and with hope, over and over again. The farm was changing, but not in the ways Daniel had first imagined. The weeds were still thick, the fences still shaky, yet something intangible was shifting. Shadow had begun to linger closer to the barn, his dark eyes following Daniel's every move, nostrils flaring with curiosity rather than fear. Every small step forward felt monumental, like a secret victory no one else could witness. Daniel had begun to understand that taming a wild horse wasn't about control, it was about connection. Every approach required patience, every retreat demanded humility, and every gesture of trust was a fragile treasure. But just when it felt like progress was steady, the unpredictable nature of Shadow reminded Daniel how tenuous it all was. One afternoon, Daniel had set up a makeshift paddock, hoping to encourage Shadow to spend more time near the barn. He carefully laid out fresh hay and a bucket of water, speaking softly as he worked. For a moment, it seemed as though Shadow might finally step closer, his ears flicked forward, muscles coiled, eyes bright. But as soon as Daniel moved a little too quickly, the horse bolted with astonishing speed, disappearing into the tree-line like smoke. Daniel's chest tightened. He had hoped for a breakthrough, not another reminder of the gap that still existed between them. Those moments were the most emotionally taxing. Each step forward seemed to be followed by an invisible tug backward, testing not just Daniel's patience but his very commitment. Shadow was testing him as much as he was testing the horse, measuring the limits of trust, the willingness to endure frustration, and the capacity to see beyond fear. And Daniel knew that every misstep could set them back days, maybe weeks. Yet he refused to give up. Nightfall brought its own lessons. Daniel would sit near the barn, listening to the wind rattle the loose boards and the distant rustle of Shadow moving through the pasture. Sometimes he could hear the faint snort of the horse in the dark, a reminder that even in distance, connection was possible. He thought of the parallels between his life and Shadow's, the scars, the caution, the fear of trusting too easily. It became clear that this wasn't just a story about a wild horse. It was a story about resilience, about rebuilding something broken and finding hope where it seemed impossible. Then came the storm that would test everything Daniel had learned so far. A summer thunderstorm erupted without warning, lightning splitting the sky, torrential rain flooding the fields. Daniel ran to check the barn, heart hammering, fearing for the structure and for Shadow. But when he reached the paddock, it was empty. Panic surged through him. He ran through the pasture, calling Shadow's name over the roar of the storm, every step slippery in mud and water. And then he saw him, trapped on a narrow ridge above the swollen creek, muscles trembling, eyes wide with terror. Daniel didn't hesitate. He sprinted through the storm, slipping and sliding, shouting words of reassurance. Shadow flinched with every step he took, ready to bolt, ready to disappear forever. But Daniel held his ground, keeping his voice calm, steady, and full of empathy. Slowly, inch by inch, he closed the distance, offering a hand and a presence that said, "You are not alone. I'm here." For the first time, Shadow allowed him to guide him to safety. No lead rope, no force, just mutual recognition and an unspoken bond forged in fear and trust. As they reached higher, drier ground, Daniel felt a surge of emotion so intense it brought tears to his eyes. The storm raged around them, but for that moment, there was only the horse and the man, each learning to lean on the other. After the storm, something subtle but profound changed. Shadow began letting Daniel approach within a few feet without fleeing. He would graze nearby while Daniel worked in the barn, observing with quiet curiosity. Sometimes he would even lower his head, allowing Daniel to touch the mane, the neck, small gestures, monumental in meaning. Each tiny breakthrough was a dramatic step toward connection, a victory built on patience, empathy, and courage. Daniel also began noticing the horse's personality in ways he hadn't before. Shadow had a playful streak, nipping gently at branches, tossing his head, showing flashes of humor that only someone who had spent hours watching him could detect. There were moments of awe, watching the horse gallop across the fields, muscles rippling, coat gleaming in the sunlight, utterly free and untamed. Daniel felt a mix of humility and wonder. This creature had survived so much, yet still exuded grace and strength. But the bond was not yet unbreakable. One evening, as Daniel attempted to move Shadow closer to the barn for the night, the horse panicked, bolting into the trees. Daniel chased, slipping in mud, heart racing, calling his name. For a tense hour, Shadow eluded him, disappearing into the forest. Daniel feared that a single mistake could undo weeks of progress, that the fragile trust they had built could be shattered in moments. The tension was palpable, both for him and for anyone following the story. When Shadow finally returned, alone, exhausted, and wary, it was a quiet lesson in resilience. Daniel didn't scold him. He simply sat nearby, speaking softly, letting the horse know he was safe, that he was understood, and that trust could be rebuilt. The slow, deliberate process of repair was more important than immediate success. Daniel realized that every setback, every flight, every moment of resistance was part of the larger story. A story about patience, persistence, and the profound depth of connection between humans and horses. And as the weeks passed, the bond deepened in unexpected ways. Shadow began following Daniel voluntarily, lingering near the barn, and even allowing grooming sessions without tension. He would nuzzle Daniel's shoulder, step closer when spoken to gently, and occasionally look at him with an almost human understanding, a reflection of mutual respect and growing affection. Daniel's own growth mirrored Shadow's. He began to confront personal scars he had long ignored, the fear of failure, the doubts about forming lasting relationships, the anxiety of being abandoned. Shadow became both a mirror and a guide, showing him that trust and healing required courage, patience, and the willingness to face discomfort. And the farm itself, once a symbol of decay, began to transform into a sanctuary of life and hope. By the end of Part 3, the audience is fully invested. They've seen Shadow's wildness, Daniel's patience, and the small, fragile victories that make the story so compelling. Questions linger. Will Shadow ever fully trust Daniel? What challenges lie ahead as they deepen their bond? And what hidden lessons will the horse teach the man? Lessons about resilience, courage, and the transformative power of empathy. For viewers following this emotional journey, Part 3 reinforces the stakes, builds suspense, and reminds us all why the connection between humans and horses is so profoundly moving. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the moments ahead promise awe, heartbreak, and the kind of emotional triumphs that stay with you long after the video ends. Months had passed since Daniel first stepped onto the rundown farm. What had once been an untamed, lonely landscape now hummed with life. The grasses were taller and greener in places he had cleared, the barn walls sturdier thanks to careful repairs, and Shadow. Shadow was no longer just a wild, wary horse. He had begun to choose Daniel's company. He lingered near the barn without being prompted, nuzzled Daniel's shoulder when he approached, and even allowed himself to be groomed without flinching. Each day brought new signs that the bond they had forged through patience, courage, and empathy was deepening in ways Daniel had only dreamed of. Yet, the path to full trust is never smooth, especially with a creature as fiercely independent as Shadow. One morning, Daniel woke to find the horse agitated, pacing the paddock, ears pinned back, nostrils flaring. Something had spooked him, maybe the distant growl of a stray dog, the sudden crash of a falling branch, or simply a memory of past dangers. Daniel approached slowly, speaking in the calm, measured tones he had learned to use. Shadow flinched, backed away, and then, as if testing the limits of their connection, bolted across the pasture. Daniel's heart sank, but he didn't chase recklessly. He had learned the importance of letting Shadow make his own choices. Instead, he followed at a careful distance, calling softly, moving with patience rather than force. The horse paused near the edge of the trees, muscles coiled, eyes wide, chest heaving. And then, something extraordinary happened. Shadow hesitated, turned his head, and looked back at Daniel. Not with fear, not with defiance, but with recognition. He had remembered the countless hours of care, the countless moments of calm persistence. For the first time, he made the choice to trust, fully, consciously, and deliberately. That moment felt monumental. Daniel's chest tightened as he slowly closed the distance, hand extended, speaking in low, gentle tones. Shadow didn't flee. He didn't bolt. He stepped forward, tentative at first, then with growing confidence, until Daniel could run his hand along his neck, feel the warmth of his muscles, and see the depth of intelligence and emotion in those dark, expressive eyes. It was a breakthrough not just for the horse, but for Daniel as well, a mirror of his own journey toward healing, courage, and self-discovery. The days that followed were filled with a new rhythm, a dance of trust and companionship. Shadow allowed Daniel to ride him for short stretches, testing his limits and exploring the fields together. The farm became a living classroom, teaching lessons that went far beyond horsemanship. Daniel learned to read subtle cues, muscle tension, shifts in weight, the flick of an ear, and Shadow, in turn, learned to rely on Daniel's calm presence, to trust in his guidance. Each shared moment strengthened the bond, weaving a connection that neither creature nor man could have achieved alone. But the story was far from simple or predictable. One afternoon, while clearing an old pasture fence with Shadow nearby, Daniel stumbled over a hidden root and twisted his ankle. Pain shot up his leg and he collapsed to the ground. Shadow, sensing the sudden vulnerability, froze for a moment, nostrils flaring, then did something remarkable. He backed up slightly, waited, and then stepped closer, nuzzling Daniel gently, offering warmth, presence, and a silent reassurance. The horse's instinctive empathy was undeniable. Shadow wasn't just a companion, he was a teacher, a protector, and a mirror of trust and courage. This incident sparked a turning point in Daniel's understanding. He realized that the bond they shared wasn't about control or dominance. It was about vulnerability, mutual respect, and the willingness to meet each other where they were. Shadow had taught him patience, persistence, and the transformative power of empathy. And in turn, Daniel had shown Shadow that humans could be safe, predictable, and kind, an entirely new experience for a creature who had survived on instinct and wariness alone. The climax of this chapter came unexpectedly. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson, a neighbor stopped by with news of a horse auction in town. A rare breed, heavily prized, was being sold, and Daniel felt a pang of fear. Would Shadow's trust be enough to keep him safe if others tried to intervene? Would the past, with its scars and dangers, come rushing back? The tension was palpable, a dramatic rehook that reminded viewers that the story was not over. Daniel knew the answer lay not in fear, but in action. He spent the next day reinforcing the barn, securing gates, and preparing a small enclosure where Shadow could feel safe. He walked with him, spoke with him, and ensured that every precaution honored the trust they had built. Shadow responded in kind, staying close, eyes alert but calm, muscles relaxed in a way that said, "I know you have my back." It was during this time that the bond revealed its true depth. Shadow allowed Daniel to ride him across the fields freely, without fear or hesitation. They moved in harmony, a dance of trust, courage, and shared joy. Daniel felt a surge of emotion, relief, awe, and gratitude for this once wild creature who had chosen him as a partner. And in that moment, the farm itself seemed transformed. The broken fences, the overgrown fields, and the dilapidated barn no longer felt like symbols of failure. They were proof of patience, resilience, and the power of connection. The culmination of these experiences reinforced a larger truth. Some bonds are earned slowly, painfully, and deliberately. Some connections require risk, humility, and unwavering persistence. Shadow had changed Daniel's life not through obedience, but through the lessons of trust, empathy, and the courage to face fear together. And Daniel, in turn, had shown Shadow that kindness could be steady, consistent, and transformative, a lesson the horse had never experienced before. As Part 4 closes, the audience is on the edge of their seats. Shadow is no longer just a wild horse. He is a companion, a teacher, and a symbol of hope. Daniel's journey has been fraught with tension, setbacks, and emotional challenges, but the rewards are undeniable. The next chapter promises the heartwarming resolution that viewers have been waiting for, a culmination of trust, courage, and the profound bond that only a human and a horse can share. For those watching, this is the moment to reflect, to feel awe at the resilience of both human and animal, and to be reminded of the power of patience and empathy. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the final chapter will bring joy, tears, and the kind of emotional triumph that makes stories like this unforgettable. The farm had transformed alongside the bond between man and horse. What had once been a neglected, overgrown expanse was now alive with promise. The barn sturdy and welcoming, fences mended, and fields open, sun-dappled, and ready to be explored. But it wasn't just the farm that had changed. Daniel himself had transformed. His tense shoulders, once burdened with doubt and regret, now carried a calm confidence. His eyes, once haunted by past failures and heartbreak, now shone with quiet wonder. And at the center of it all stood Shadow, the horse who had been wary, wild, and untouchable, now a partner in every sense of the word. That morning began like any other. Shadow waited at the edge of the pasture, ears pricked, muscles relaxed, eyes bright with intelligence and trust. Daniel approached slowly, speaking softly, extending a hand without expecting anything. The horse stepped forward without hesitation, allowing Daniel to run his hand along his neck, to stroke the mane that had once been tangled with fear and scars. There was no resistance, no tension, only an unspoken understanding that had been built over countless small victories, moments of patience, and the shared experience of facing danger together. But the true test had yet to come. A local equestrian club had scheduled a small community event at a neighboring farm, inviting local horses to showcase their skills. For Daniel, it wasn't about competition, it was about proving to himself and to Shadow how far they had come. The challenge wasn't the performance, it was stepping into the unknown together, trusting that the bond they had built could withstand new environments, distractions, and the unpredictability of other animals. When they arrived, the pasture was bustling with activity. Horses neighing, riders shouting instructions, children laughing, and the occasional whistle cutting through the chaos. Shadow's ears flicked nervously, nostrils flaring at unfamiliar scents and sounds. Daniel sensed the tension, took a deep breath, and spoke to him calmly, steadily. "I'm here. We're together. You've got this." For a moment, Shadow froze, muscles coiled. But then he stepped forward, following Daniel's lead. Each movement was deliberate, a dance of trust and understanding. Where once he would have bolted at the first unexpected noise, now he remained steady, attentive, and responsive. The audience could feel the tension and release with each step, the bond between man and horse almost tangible in the way they moved together. It was a triumph not just of skill, but of patience, courage, and resilience. Spectators whispered in awe, some wiping tears from their eyes, recognizing that what they were witnessing was more than a display. It was a story of redemption, trust, and the profound connection between humans and animals. Shadow, once untouchable, now trusted Daniel fully, allowing himself to be guided with gentle cues and soft words. The wildness remained, but it was tempered by love, respect, and shared experience. After the event, as the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the fields gold and amber, Daniel and Shadow returned to the farm. They walked together through the now familiar pasture, the breeze ruffling Shadow's mane, the soft crunch of hooves on earth echoing in the quiet evening. Daniel paused at the barn, looking at the horse with deep gratitude. "You changed everything," he whispered. Shadow nuzzled his shoulder, a gesture of mutual recognition and affection, a silent promise that their bond was enduring and unbreakable. That night, as Daniel sat by the fire near the barn, Shadow resting nearby, he reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The wild horse that had first appeared at the edge of the field, scarred, wary, and untamed, had transformed not because of dominance or force, but because of patience, empathy, and unwavering trust. And Daniel himself had been transformed as well, learning to confront fear, embrace vulnerability, and recognize the value of slow, deliberate connection. For viewers, the story delivers a powerful lesson. The most profound bonds are earned through patience, understanding, and courage. Shadow's journey from wildness to trust mirrors the human experience of healing from fear, embracing vulnerability, and finding hope in unexpected places. It is a reminder that love, whether between humans or between humans and animals, is never instant. It grows, strengthens, and deepens over time, often through moments of challenge, uncertainty, and quiet triumph. As the video draws to a close, the farm rests peacefully in the golden light of evening. Daniel and Shadow, side by side, embody resilience, trust, and the extraordinary power of connection. Every fence mended, every pasture cleared, every cautious step taken together represents a journey that is both deeply personal and universally moving. It is a story of courage, patience, and the awe-inspiring potential of love to transform lives. Before the screen fades, Daniel looks directly at the camera, smiling, and says softly, "Thank you for following our journey. Remember, sometimes the wildest hearts hold the greatest lessons, and the most unexpected companions can change your life forever." If you've enjoyed this story, share it, like it, and subscribe. We have so much more to explore together. Shadow nuzzles him once more as if in agreement, the gentle swish of his tail and relaxed posture signaling peace, trust, and completion. The rundown farm, once a symbol of struggle and neglect, now stands as a testament to perseverance, hope, and the transformative power of empathy. And in that golden twilight, the audience is left with awe, inspiration, and the unforgettable image of a man and a horse, two souls, once lost, now found, together rewriting the story of their lives.